When I wake up in the morning, love, and the sunlight hurts my eyes, and something without warning, love, bears heavy on my mind. Then I look at you, and the world is alright with me. Just one look at you, and I know it's gonna be a lovely day. Lovely day, lovely day, lovely day, lovely day, lovely day, it's gonna be lovely day, lovely day, lovely day, lovely day, lovely day, lovely day.
One of the first questions I wanted to ask you was where you're coming from theologically. I know that you have a connection with the United Church Canada. I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing your own
Yeah.
background.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in the United Church. Originally, my family went to Collingwood United Church, and then that amalgamated with several other churches, and one of them being Wilson Heights. And so my family church is Wilson Heights. And when I was about 18 or 19, I became a youth minister and worked for the United Church for about maybe 10 years in that
I
role.
did not
So
know that.
yeah, so I was working youth and young adult ministry at St. Stephen's Congregation, and then I had my certificate in youth ministry, and then I went and I left St. Stephen's and then just sort of worked with a wider church and was doing youth events and providing music leadership and things like that for youth and young adult events. And so I'm still kind of like in that world. I still do events once in a while. I still do music for conferences, and I did general counsel a couple years ago. That was really fun. Yeah, so I have deep United Church roots. Spent many years at Naramata Center, and so I feel like, yeah, I'm a UC girl.
Yeah, and so you're you're also just back from a week at Naramata. Yeah, a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it was great.
now Naramata is one of those places that is just good for the soul. Yeah, and soul is one of those terms that's really hard to define. Like we could come at it from the philosophical, metaphysical angle about what is the soul, or we could come at it from a more organic direction. How would you define soul, Dawn?
Well, I think yeah, there's many ways that it can be described. I think in a way that we all feel is it's like, oh, that has soul. One is kind of it sounds like a music style, right? But I think we can all recognize that anything can have soul, and it's like when we feel a sense of humanity in whatever someone is doing. I think that's soul.
So, and in terms of the music style that is known as soul, in your material, in your promotional material, you describe yourself as a soul singer, and how did you come to that? Like, has that been always the music that has spoken to your soul, and how did you come to make that your life?
Cool question. Well, I think growing up, I grew up in a very musical household, and we had access to a lot of different music and different music styles. And I had siblings who were older than I was, or than I am, and so I was just sort of kind of at the whim of their musical tastes. But there was something that spoke to me while listening to gospel and soul music that, I don't know, just resonated. It was something that I loved, the freedom that is in it. And I love that people are really expressing things that couldn't be necessarily shared with just words alone. And I feel like soul music is it's medicine. I feel like any music that was created by an enslaved African person, any kind of descendant of that music, it's really just medicine and healing music, which is why I think it resonates with so many people, is they recognize that sort of sense of it's like a balm.
It is medicine for the soul, and it's not just medicine for the individual soul, but I think it's medicine for the collective soul, the collective consciousness, and the soul music being so tied in with the civil rights movement and a particular time in American history. And when you look at what's happening in the world today, how and I'm just like watching in horror the news out of the States just in the past couple of days again. How does the music have the potential to bring about both challenge and healing?
Well, I think in any kind of successful civil rights movement, the music has been fundamental in helping to keep people inspired and connecting people. And sometimes when, words aren't enough and talking isn't enough, music is so powerful that it can really help to get points across. In the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, they would take church hymns and church songs and because they were familiar songs, right? And everyone knew them, and they would just change the words slightly. And anytime there was silence or something, happened, or there was nothing left to say, then someone would just start singing, and it was a way of unifying people. So I think right now it's tricky because no one is writing protest songs, or no one is writing that music. So I feel like it's harder to unite people in some ways because there are no songs, and not everybody knows the songs. Not everybody's going to church. So there's some ways of like group singing that have changed, which affects how people protest. So I think it's possible for those things, for music to provide change and healing. But I think we just have to start singing again. And
one song I'm thinking about is You Tombout, that Janelle Monáe. And earlier in the pandemic time, I saw like David Byrne and a whole group had taken it onto Broadway, and like that, very powerful. And that sent me back to look at the original Janelle Monáe video, and it just like blew, like there's a protest song. There's a
yeah, exactly. It's so powerful, right? And that was after Sandra Bland was murdered. Because they were like, say her name, like that was no one was talking about her, And it's so cool when that came out. Like, it was, I have goosebumps just talking about it. But like, you know, it was one of those moments where I feel like people started to remember, and that helped to push the movement forward even, you know, a little bit further. Yeah, there's a great video of a dance company, a dance school, and I think based in Oregon and Washington, and they are dancing to it. And it's just so powerful. It's like visceral. Yeah, it's exciting.
The origin of soul music has like this roots in gospel, roots in spirituals, and but it made the transition, like what the ultimate cross. It made the transition into kind of the contemporary popular culture. Who are your soul music heroes? Who are, or heroines, or
Oh wow, there are so many. I mean,
yeah.
And it's interesting too because in the genre of soul music, there are so many like subcategories. You know, you know, there's like soul and funk, soul and R&B. You know, definitely singers like Sam Cooke and Aretha Franklin, Nina Simone, Gladys Knight, James Brown, Marvin Gaye. You know, I don't know. It's a very long list. And one thing that's very interesting about soul music, which pardon me if I go on a little tangent, but I think it's really important to recognize, is, you know, as you mentioned, the music is connected to like a long line from all the way back there, from when African people were brought to North America and enslaved. And, you know, I think sometimes people forget that those people had their own traditions and their own ways of, their own sense of spirituality, their own ways of praying. And those things didn't go away, right? So I think it's really interesting because in all their music, Issei Barnwell talks about how, you know, there's capital S spiritual and little s spiritual music. And so when she talks about spirituals or spiritual music, she's talking about it in the sense of, you know, spiritual music that accompanies every day. You're waking and sleeping, music that, you know, helps you work, helps you play. And then the little s spirituals is like, you know, the sort of codified collection of music that came out of, you know, out of Bible stories, right? So, okay, so those traditions happened, and then basically what happened in a nutshell is that after slavery ended, and mindful that people couldn't read or write, and they had no way of gathering, but they were allowed to gather for church. And so a lot of their identity and ways of connecting became entangled in their religion. And so as slavery ended and people began to move from rural to more urban centers, they brought all of their traditions and music with them. So, you know, things that were more folk oriented and, you know, were done with hands and feet were now done with like more electric instrumentation. And so all that, as once people got into cities and they were working, and then we had soul music. It became more secular. And so, you know, there's a very fine line between gospel and soul music. It was basically, you know, all the blues and soul musicians would get up and go to church the next day and play in the band, right? So it's like, it's sort of like this permeable wall where this music is going back and forth. And I heard a really interesting lecture when I was in New Orleans in January by this pastor named Christopher Sylvan, and he talked about the impact of gospel music and spirituals, little s spirituals, on the music, and especially brass music in New Orleans. But his main point is that because Black people had this sense of refuge that enabled them, and the sense of faith to that enabled them to survive and endure all the things that they survived and endured. It became like that sense and that feeling became imbued in their spiritual music. So it's music, and they could have had that same sense of endurance and faith in their own traditional, more traditional, original ways of spirituality. So, but because they encountered Christianity, it kind of just became superimposed in Christianity. But his main point was soul music is the way it is because descendants of enslaved peoples have this deep sense of faith that that allows you to let go, and because that no matter how bad things are, that something greater is waiting for you, that all your family is waiting for you, and that's what got people through. That's why I'm here today, because my ancestors believed in something greater than themselves, and they had this faith, knowing that things would get better. They didn't know when, but they knew that it would get better. And so he called it, you got to learn to love the let go. And having this deep sense of faith that's distilled in like religious music or gospel music in particular. And then as it gets mixed in with soul music, that feeling is still there. So I think that's what soul music is that acknowledgement of faith, and that sense of that no matter what happens, that you are held in some kind of way. And I think when you listen to Aretha Franklin, she's someone who straddled both worlds of gospel and soul. You can hear that when she sings. It's this sense of that there's a freedom and a sense that nothing can harm her. And I think that's what people connect to. And yeah. Anyways, that's a long tangent, but I think it's important because for me, that really shapes how I think about music in general and how I think about soul music in particular, is because it's comes from a people who endured horrible, horrible things, yet knew that they could keep going because they had this formidable faith.
Wow, thank you. And there's so much more when just as you mentioned, Aretha, the image that was coming to mind was of her singing around Obama's inauguration, and then her memorial service more recently, and the how she was able to like express kind of like the soul of the nation kind of rising up. And when I look at like how what's happening in the world now, it's like we need people like Aretha. We need people like you, Dawn. We need you to because there's something in the expression, in the singing, that goes beyond the words, that really empowers and uplifts and challenges. And when I think of like where we're at in the church right now, maybe not just in the church, but just in our culture right now, in this moment where we're kind of locked down, we're not connecting in the way that we have been able to in the past. There's this uncertainty about the future. And yet when you talked about soul music and that faith, that about endurance, we need that. We so much need that.
I agree. Yeah, endurance and resilient spirits. Yeah, I think we live especially in North America and Europe, we live a life of luxury, and so I feel like our resilience muscles haven't had a chance to get worked out, and so I like to think of this time as a time to build some resiliency, and yeah, but I agree. I feel like it's easy to, everything is kind of relational, right? Like to what have experienced. It's like, oh, well, this is bad. If my life is great and, I have a flat tire, it's like, oh, your reaction to the flat tire is like, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened.
Right.
Or when you see a little kid has like a beautiful life and they don't get what they want, it's like, this is the worst thing, and they have a fit. But I think as we grow and live, we encounter and gather experiences that help to build those muscles. And I feel like we maybe have been a little bit complacent and we've had some too much luxury. So I think it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, and to probably luxury parallels privilege, right?
Oh yeah.
And when our United Church, we're the majority of United Church congregations are coming from a place of incredible privilege, predominantly white, predominantly middle class, predominantly mainline, and even if we're not the dominant church there's still that kind of prestige that people associate with the United Church. I'm wondering, what was it like growing up in the United Church in a Black family? Were there other Black people in the church?
One other person, and I think she ended up going to church because she was friends with my family. She was like, we called her auntie, and and she still goes to our church. But yeah, there wasn't, and her kids would come to church once in a while, and so we were the only ones really. And I didn't really notice it until I was maybe about 12 or 13, and we had this amazing minister come to our congregation. His name is Jim Manley, and him and his partner Eva Manley were fearless allies with social justice and ecumenical work, especially in Latin America, in Guatemala specifically. And so just the way that they shone a light on what were happening, like things that were happening in the world, and unjust things that were happening in the world, really had a huge impact on me, and it made me start to question things in a healthy way. And so I remember going to my confirmation class, and talking about, I asked him, I was like, what's up with Jesus? Like, why is every image of Jesus always white and blonde haired and blue eyes? Didn't Jesus, like, isn't he from the Middle East? Like, there's a lot of brown and Black people there. And I remember Jim, like, really, didn't try to brush my questions away. Like, we had a great discussion about it. And then I remember, he must have told someone else in the congregation that we had this talk. And so I remember one Christmas, the congregation gifted me this like beautiful hand carved African nativity scene, and they said, we want you to find, we want you to feel like this is your place, and that that there is a Jesus that looks like you, and that there is, you're represented, and it's important that you see yourself in the world. And that was like so huge. And I still have that nativity scene. I use it every year. Like, it's one of my most prized possessions. And I think it's so transformative as a kid to, one, be taken seriously by adults, and for them to understand your questioning, and for them to validate your questioning, and your own presence in the world was totally amazing. So for the most part, being a Black woman in the United Church has been awesome. It's been great. And I feel I've never have felt othered or have experienced anything, unspeakable. I mean, my mom has, and I think that's just because she's had more encounters with, older white men from a different time, who would say really ridiculous things without thinking of them. But for myself, I can say that I've always felt really held and respected and loved.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm really glad to hear that you've had that experience. But I'm sure that there are people who have come into contact with a more toxic side of the church, and I think it's something that our congregations are having to really examine ourselves, and to be challenged by the Black Lives Matter movement. So in the scripture for this week, so in the lectionary, it was like, just kind of gave me goosebumps when I looked at what was the lectionary reading going to be for this week. So in the Hebrew Bible reading for this week, it's from Exodus, and it's about God calling to Moses, who's just la 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 la, going along his merry little way. God calling to him from out of the burning bush and telling him, I have heard the cries of my people, and I cannot see them suffer 1 minute longer, to paraphrase. So where I'm wondering, I think a lot of people think about the God of the Hebrew Bible as just this angry God lashing out wrath and anger all the time. But for me, the thread that runs throughout the scriptures is this social justice, is this cry, God crying out for justice. And it took a burning bush to catch Moses' attention. Where is God? Like, what are the burning bushes that we are possibly walking past right now? Or like, is there something in your life that you could point to as a burning bush moment?
Oh, I mean, there are so many. We're surrounded by burning bushes. Like, George Floyd's a burning bush.
Yeah.
Jacob Blake is a burning bush. Breonna Taylor's a burning bush. And in our own country, the way we treat First Nations and Indigenous people is a burning bush. The way we walk past someone who is homeless and begging for change is a burning bush. I think anytime we refuse to acknowledge another human's humanity and divine right to exist, we're walking past a burning bush. Yeah, and and then we just get used to walking past them. And I mean, I feel that way anyways. Maybe others don't feel that. Maybe our privileges have, led us to have some kind of fireproof, or I don't know. But I just feel like those are burning bushes to me. But what I think in this culture that we live in and in this society that we live in, um, unfortunately, I think our burning bushes will have to be personal
Mm-hmm.
and personal offenses. Like, and people will have to experience it because I feel like we're just so disconnected from each other and from feeling empathy and um, enough that we would act, you know, because people might have empathy and be like, oh, isn't that horrible, I can't believe that happened, and then they're like drinking their latte and like going on about their day. um, yeah, I think we just it has to be like directly affected. We have to be
Mm-hmm.
directly affected,
Mm-hmm.
inconvenienced, put out.
One of the things I love about the Moses story is that Moses felt totally unprepared for what God was calling him to. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that we all have this sense, well, it's too big. It's like what can I do? What can I do? Well, I think if God can work with Moses, God can certainly work with any one of us.
Totally. It's such a theme, especially in the Old Testament. Like God keeps asking people, regular people, to do insane hard things. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and it's like, you know, Noah's like, really? I don't know. Um anyways, yeah, I think we have the sense that we have to have it all figured out before we can act. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that's not true, you know. I mean, I know we know that, but I think that brings us back to that conversation of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to proceed with a deep, 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 deep faith. And I sometimes feel like as Christians, we have this like surface faith that can be like, oh, I have faith. I go to church. Um, you know, I believe in God, and just as if I do these things, I'll be okay. Whereas, you know, we need to have Job faith. We need to have,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, the faith of enslaved African people
Mm-hmm.
that allows you to really transcend beyond yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that knowing that, okay, I know that this work that I'm doing, I'm not going to see the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
I have to have faith that the fruit is going to happen, not in my time, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't plant the seeds, right?
Yeah.
So,
It's singing that change is going to come, and
yeah.
like not knowing that like it's not going to come tomorrow at 5 p.m., but that it's both longing and um prophetic.
Totally. Yeah. That's a wonderful way to put it. Um, yeah. Yeah, and I think we just have to be like get comfortable with being uncomfortable and
Mm-hmm.
with doing the hard thing and having, you know, formidable integrity, and it comes in, you know, it starts small. It can be in all parts of your um of our being, right? Like it's like, oh, you know, you drop a piece of garbage and you just keep walking. Well, the right thing is to go and pick it up and put it where it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be, right? Like that's a small example, but I feel like if you don't do that, it's like a slippery slope
Mm-hmm.
to um, not caring, and
Mm-hmm.
we we all need to care
Mm-hmm.
as much as possible right now about everything and everyone.
There's a Jewish concept, tikkun olam, which I think translates as healing of the world, and uh, that's what we're each charged with, is the healing of the world, and big capital H healing, capital W world, and then smaller. Um, um, so one of the things that we need to get through the difficult times are spiritual practices. Um, I'm wondering what spiritual practices, Dawn, give you, what has got you through these past 6 months? What are your spiritual practices?
That's a great
And how do they
question.
connect with soul?
One has been gratitude, and finding, just remembering the abundance that I have and the people in my life who have, um, I always think like we all have people in our life who pray for us and who have prayed for us and have wished the most beautiful things for us, whether we know it or not. So I always thank those people. I thank, just try to be grateful. I also like to pray for people, um, and it's nothing fancy, or I just hold them in my heart and in my mind, um, and it's like they don't need to know about it, but when there's this man that I used to, when I sang in a choir many, many years ago, he was a really amazing person, and a good friend of mine who was in the choir at the time, she had breast cancer, and so like 2 years went by, and she was cancer-free, feeling way better, and this man came up to her and said, "Hey, like, how are you doing? Are you okay now?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm so great. I'm so thankful." He's like, "Okay." He's like, "Just so you know, I've been praying for you every day for 2 years. And I want to know so I can take you off the list because there's other people that need to be prayed for." And I was like, oh my God. So I thought, what a beautiful thing to do. What a gorgeous thing to do. So I'm doing that. I try to do that. And just pray. Yeah. And be thankful, and I've like definitely questioned my faith and, what does it mean to be Christian? What does it mean? Like, is there God? Who's this Jesus guy? Like, but I definitely recognize that there is something greater than me and that has worked in my life in like very impactful ways. And so, I pray to that. Yeah, some people call it God, some people call it something else, but yeah.
There's I can never remember which one of the ancient old saints said that singing is praying twice. So how much is music part of your spiritual practice?
Oh yeah, it's very, very big. I can definitely say that when the pandemic first hit, I had just come back from a tour, and I couldn't sing. I just had this deep desire to be quiet. And then, so for like 2.5 months, I didn't sing, I didn't play piano, I didn't do anything. And then when George Floyd was murdered, soon after that, I just remember sitting down at the piano and I played a song, and I just like wept my heart out. And, I definitely think, I don't always get to go to church because I'm traveling a lot, or in the before times. But I would definitely I think of like what I do in the world as a singer and as a choir director, like that's my ministry. You know,
Mm-hmm.
people might call it something else, but I think of it as that. And um, yeah, so I definitely feel like when I'm singing, I'm in service of the music. I feel like the music is just an extension of God. It's just an expression of God, um, and I just think like, okay, just use me how you can. And I think it's such a privilege to be a translator.
Mm.
I think it's beautiful.
Um, just when you mentioned choir, I had the privilege of singing in your choir for just a little while. But there's something about bringing all of those voices together, and I know that people are grieving not being able to sing communally.
Hmm.
That is one of the things that people are having to grieve about this time. It's not forever, but it's for
Yeah.
now. Um, how are your choir doing?
Um, it's really amazing. Um, because we haven't been able to sing. Like it's like that's the power of music. It really brings people together and weaves, these hearts together so that if you take away the music and the singing, there's still this amazing community. So my
Mm-hmm.
choir, there's a WhatsApp group for the choir, and people are messaging each other, they're checking in on each other, they're getting together in small groups, they're
Mm-hmm.
helping each other with their gardens and making meals for the new moms in the group. Like they're amazing. They are
Or
amazing.
community for each
They're a
other. Yeah,
community, yeah, and that's
yeah,
beautiful. That's the gift of music,
yeah.
and that's like the residual of of the soul of music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful. It's pretty beautiful. And it's funny. I was thinking of you the other day, and I was like, I wish that like Leenane could come back to choir one day. I know your life is busy.
As soon as choir is allowed to start again, I am so there. Like I need to
Okay.
make it. I promise in front of all of in front of all of YouTube. Um, I want to be. If you will have me back,
Oh my gosh, in a
I want to sing.
heartbeat.
Yeah,
I
because
love.
there's yeah. And I love the music that you work with the choir with the repertoire, but also your spirit, how much you pour out of yourself into the choir. Choir directing is such a like sounds like such a bossy thing, but it's more like pottery, right? It's more like you're
Mm,
molding and shaping, creating something, and we're the instrument. Like the all of the different
yeah,
voices are like there's me mixing metaphors. Um, Pottery and music, but no, it's you're the musician, and the instrument is this 50 voices who are there, and it's like in the moment when you're singing together, it's like you're tapping into a common soul, like there's
mm,
you become one when you're like, and maybe not every time that you're singing together, but when you're in that moment of flow. um
yeah.
it's an awesome feeling. Yeah.
It is beautiful, and I think that's why people love singing together, and especially in choirs, is for those moments. It's like it's a holy, sacred experience that,
Hmm.
um, yeah, it's life giving, and I feel like very humbled and that I get to work with people who trust me enough to um, sort of try and be the potter, um, and yeah, it's like a very vulnerable thing to stand up in front of people and ooh, try and interpret things, and um, but I think it's such a beautiful um, opportunity. I once had a mentor who said, like, as a choir director, he's like, he's like, you have to look at your choir. You have to look at your choir when you're in front of them, because often like directors they won't make eye contact. And he's like, they're being vulnerable for you. You have to be vulnerable for them. And so I always think of it as just this like beautiful exchange. And he always says, look for the yes faces. Look for the yes faces. And it's cool because, once you find a yes face, then you're like, oh, and then your face looks like this, and then soon enough your whole choir looks like this.
Right.
So
Beautiful. Yeah.
beautiful. Okay.
So Dawn, I'm just so grateful that you have shared of yourself today, both musically and of your soul. Well, you shared in speaking and in music, you shared your soul. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.